Ginny Cooper was an expert at recognizing a lie before it was even spoken. She had learned to spot it in the way a hand gripped a wine glass too tightly, or how a smile never quite reached the corners of a woman's eyes. Tonight, beneath the golden chandeliers of the Gilded Oak, Ginny's every nerve was on fire. She knew that the man at the center table, the most feared name in the city, was dining with his own destruction. Bobby Ronald didn't look like a man in the crosshairs. He looked like a titan, his black suit tailored with razor-sharp precision and his slicked-back hair catching the warm glow of the room. Across from him, his wife, Lisa Armando, was the picture of sleeveless elegance. She looked at him with a quiet, practiced confidence that would have fooled anyone else. They looked like royalty. They looked untouchable. But Ginny had found the cracks in the porcelain exactly 40 minutes ago. It happened when she was clearing the appetizer plates and spotted the sleek, encrypted burner phone that had slipped from Lisa's clutch into the velvet cushion of the booth. The single notification on the screen had turned Ginny's world upside down. The perimeter is set. Confirm the signal. Now, Ginny moved through the room like a ghost in a white apron, her neutral posture masking the thundering rhythm of her heart. She wasn't just seeing the fine dining anymore. She was seeing a tactical map. 2 men at the bar weren't drinking. They were watching the countdown on their watches. The heavy velvet curtains near the exit had been drawn tight, concealing more than just a draft. Even the maitre d' was avoiding Bobby's table, his face pale and eyes darting. As Ginny approached the table with the leather bill folder tucked under her arm, she saw the faint neck tattoo peeking above Bobby's collar, the mark of a man who lived by the sword. He had no idea the woman smiling at him across the vintage Bordeaux was the one holding the hilt. Ginny knew that if she didn't speak now, the man who ran the city wouldn't make it to the valet. The golden light of the chandeliers felt oppressive, casting long, skeletal shadows across the white linen tablecloths of the Gilded Oak. Ginny smoothed her apron, her movements mechanical, hiding the fact that her pulse was a frantic rhythm against her ribs. To the other diners, she was just a part of the decor, a silent, efficient ghost in a black uniform. But as she gripped the leather bill folder against her side, the small scrap of paper tucked inside felt as heavy as a lead weight. She scanned the room, her eyes sharper than they had ever been. The 2 men at the bar were still there, their drinks untouched, their bodies angled toward the center of the room like coiled springs. A new arrival had taken a seat near the kitchen door, a man with a bulky jacket that didn't fit the evening's formal dress code, his hand resting perpetually inside his pocket. Ginny knew that pocket didn't hold a wallet. It held a silencer. Bobby Ronald was laughing at something Lisa had said, his posture momentarily relaxed, his guard down for the woman who was leading him to the slaughter. Lisa looked radiant, her sleeveless black dress shimmering as she reached across the table to touch his hand. It was a perfect performance of devotion, and it made Ginny's stomach churn. Ginny took a deep breath, centering herself in the neutral posture she had perfected over years of service. She stepped into the light, moving toward table 9 with a tray of fresh water she didn't need. Every step felt like a mile. She could feel the eyes of the men at the bar tracking her, assessing if she was a threat or just a servant. She kept her gaze down, her face a mask of professional indifference. As she reached the table, the scent of Bobby's expensive cologne and Lisa's floral perfume filled her senses. Bobby didn't even look up as she refilled his glass, his focus entirely on his wife. "Your check, sir," Ginny murmured, her voice steady despite the roar of blood in her ears. She placed the leather folder directly in front of him, sliding it closer to his hand than was strictly polite. For a split second, her eyes met his, a sharp, desperate flash of contact that Lisa missed because she was busy dabbing her lips with a silk napkin. Bobby's brow furrowed, his predatory instincts catching the discord in Ginny's calm facade. His hand moved to the folder. Ginny didn't wait to see him open it. She turned on her heel and began to walk away, her back prickling with the anticipation of a gunshot. She had just handed a king the key to his survival, and in doing so, she had painted a target on her own back that would never be removed. Bobby Ronald did not reach for the folder with the casual indifference of a diner checking his tab. His hand moved with the predatory stillness of a man who lived and breathed in the margins of survival. I felt the heat of his presence behind me as I retreated toward the service station, my back prickling with the weight of his attention. Across the table, Lissa was still smiling, her sleeveless black dress shimmering as she took a slow, elegant sip of wine. She looked like a masterpiece of devotion, but the masterpiece was about to shatter. I watched from the shadows of the pillars as Bobby flicked the leather cover open. His expression didn't change, not at first. He had a face made of granite and secrets. But then, his jaw tightened, the faint neck tattoo visible as he tensed like a coiled spring. He didn't look at Lissa. He didn't look at the men at the bar. He looked directly at me. The eye contact was electric, a silent collision of worlds. In that single second, he saw the truth I was carrying, and I saw the monster inside him wake up. He didn't need to ask if I was lying. He could read the sheer, unadulterated terror in my gaze. He knew. Bobby, is something wrong? Lissa's voice was like velvet, but Bobby didn't answer. He stood up slowly, the movement so deliberate that it drew the eyes of every silent predator in the room. He didn't go for his gun. He went for me. 10 seconds, he murmured, his voice a low, lethal vibration as he reached the service station and gripped my arm. His fingers were like iron bands. If you're wrong about this, you're dead. If you're right, you're coming with me. The room went cold. The men at the bar stood up in unison, their hands disappearing beneath their jackets. The man in the bulky jacket near the kitchen door shifted his weight. Lissa was no longer smiling. She was standing, her face a mask of calculated fury. The golden chandeliers seemed to dim as the atmosphere reached its breaking point. Now, Bobby roared. The first shot shattered a crystal wine glass at the table we had just left, the sound like a thunderclap in the refined silence of the restaurant. Bobby didn't flinch. He hauled me toward the double-swing doors of the kitchen, his body acting as a human shield. Behind us, the diners dropped their forks and drew their weapons. The elegant world of the Gilded Oak was being torn apart by lead and glass. We burst through the kitchen doors into a chaos of shouting chefs and clattering pans. Keep running, Bobby commanded, his slicked back hair falling over his forehead as we sprinted past the stainless steel prep tables toward the loading dock. The waitress was gone. There was only a girl running for her life, tethered to the man who was now the only thing standing between her and a grave. The cool night air hit my face like a physical blow as we burst out of the loading dock and into the alleyway. A matte black sedan was already idling there, its headlights dark, looking like a shark submerged in deep water. Bobby didn't slow down. He practically threw me into the back seat before sliding in beside me. The door closed with a heavy, pressurized thunk that silenced the world outside, leaving only the muffled sound of distant gunfire and the frantic pounding of my own heart. The driver didn't wait for a command. He tore away from the curb with a screech of tires that threw me against the leather upholstery. I scrambled for a grip, my fingers sinking into the seat as the car swerved through the narrow back streets. Stay down, Bobby commanded, his voice a low, vibrating growl. He was already on his phone, his thumb flying across the screen with lethal precision. He looked at the tinted window, his jaw set in a line of pure iron. The faint tattoo on his neck seemed to pulse with the adrenaline coursing through the cabin. I looked back through the rear window, my breath hitching. In the distance, the warm, golden glow of the Gilded Oak was receding, replaced by the flickering neon of the city. I saw a flash of headlights, 3 cars, moving with aggressive synchronization, weaving through traffic to close the gap. Lissa's hunters. The realization crashed over me then, colder than the air conditioning. I wasn't just a waitress anymore. I was a witness. I was the girl who had whispered the truth, and Lissa had seen me do it. She had seen my face, my uniform, my name tag, my small, drafty apartment with the mismatched furniture and the cat that waited for me at the door. It was all gone. I couldn't go back to the life where I was invisible, because I had stepped into the light to save a man who lived in the shadows. My things, I whispered, my voice sounding small and fragile against the roar of the engine. My life. She knows who I am. Bobby turned his head, his sharp, dark eyes pinning me to the seat. There was no pity in his expression, only a hard, diamond-like recognition of my new reality. He reached out, his hand hovering near my shoulder but not quite touching it, a gesture of ownership rather than comfort. "You don't have a life back there anymore, Ginny," he said, and the way he used my name felt like a brand. "You traded it for mine. From this second on, the only place you're safe is behind my walls. You're in my world now, and in this world, we don't look back." As the car accelerated onto the highway, the city lights became long, distorted streaks of silver and blue. I watched my reflection in the window, a girl in a stained apron who looked like a stranger. I was speeding toward a fortress I didn't know, protected by a man I should have feared, leaving everything I ever was in the rearview mirror. The black gates of Ronald's estate didn't just open. They retreated, admitting us into a fortress of cold stone and razor-wire precision. The car slowed as we approached the main house, a sprawling monolith that looked less like a home and more like a command center. As the sedan came to a halt, the doors were jerked open by men who didn't look like security guards. They looked like soldiers. Their eyes, hard and scanning for threats, immediately zeroed in on me, the girl in the stained apron still trembling in the back of an armored beast. "Boss, who is this?" The question came from a man with a jagged scar across his brow, his hand hovering near the holster at his hip. He didn't look at me with pity. He looked at me like a security breach. Bobby stepped out of the car, his movements fluid and dangerous. He didn't answer immediately. He waited until I had scrambled out after him, standing in the harsh glare of the floodlights. I felt small, an inkblot on a pristine canvas of power. "She's the reason I'm breathing, Marco," Bobby said, his voice cutting through the humid night air like a blade. A murmur went through the half-dozen men gathered on the gravel. They looked at each other, then back at me, their suspicion curdling into something more complex, distrust. To them, I was an unknown variable, a witness from the outside world who had seen the cracks in their king's armor. "She's a waitress, Bobby," Marco countered, stepping forward into the light. "She's seen too much. We don't know who she talks to, or if this was just part of the play to get an outsider in." I felt the weight of their judgment, a physical pressure that made me want to shrink back into the leather seats of the car. I was a liability in their eyes, a loose thread that needed to be cut. But Bobby turned, his silhouette tall and unyielding against the stone facade of the house. He walked toward me, and for a moment, I feared he had changed his mind. Instead, he reached out, his hand gripping my chin, forcing me to look up into the icy depths of his eyes. "She noticed the one thing all of you missed," Bobby said, his voice loud enough for every man on the lawn to hear. "She saw the knife Lissa was holding while you were all admiring the handle. She stays." He let go of me, but the heat of his touch lingered. He looked at Marco, his expression one of absolute authority. "She has eyes that see the things people try to hide. In this house, that makes her more valuable than any of you." He gestured toward the massive oak doors. "Take her to the library. Secure the perimeter. And someone find her something to wear that doesn't smell like a kitchen." As I was ushered inside, the men parted like a dark tide. I wasn't welcome yet. I could feel their eyes burning into my back, but I was protected. I had entered the lion's den, and the lion had decided that I was part of the pride. The library of the estate felt like a mausoleum for secrets, lined with thousands of leather-bound books that seemed to absorb the sound of my ragged breathing. Bobby had shed his jacket, his white sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle and etched with dark, intricate ink. He didn't sit. He paced the length of the Persian rug like a caged panther, his intensity vibrating in the small space between us. "Tell me again," he commanded, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "Every syllable, every inflection. Don't give me the summary, Ginny. Give me the truth." I sat on the edge of a velvet chair, feeling absurdly out of place in my stained waitress uniform. I closed my eyes, pulling myself back to the cold, clinical tiles of the restaurant restroom. "She didn't know I was there." I began, my voice trembling slightly. She walked in, the heels of her shoes clicking like a metronome. She was laughing, that light, airy laugh she used at the table, but the second the door swung shut, it died. It was replaced by a voice I didn't recognize. Cold. Surgical. Bobby stopped pacing. He leaned against the edge of his mahogany desk, his dark eyes fixed on me with a terrifying focus. "She said," He thinks tonight is a celebration, I whispered, the words feeling like shards of glass in my throat. Then she said, instead, he walks into my evidence. The Ronald empire dies with him. She wasn't talking about a rival family, Bobby. She was talking about a file, a conviction. The silence that followed was suffocating. I watched the realization wash over him, the slow, agonizing death of a man's trust. He wasn't just mourning a marriage. He was realizing he had invited a Trojan horse into the very heart of his sanctuary. Evidence, Bobby echoed, the words sounding like a curse. He turned toward a hidden wall safe, his movements stiff. She didn't just want me dead. She wanted me erased. She's been building a casing for months, right under my nose. He looked at me then, and for a fleeting second, the mask of the Mafia king slipped, revealing a man who had been hollowed out by the one person he thought was his anchor. She has a key, he murmured, more to himself than to me. A safety deposit box I opened in her name for our anniversary. I thought I was giving her security. I was giving her a tomb for my legacy. I saw the shift in him then, the grief hardening into a diamond-sharp resolve. He wasn't just a victim anymore. He was a hunter. He reached across the desk and took my hand. His grip was firm, a silent acknowledgement that I was no longer just the girl from the restaurant. I was the witness to the crime of the century, and together, we were going to tear the evidence to pieces. The following morning, the library had been transformed into a hive of digital warfare. Banks of monitors glowed with scrolling green code, casting a ghostly pallor over the faces of Bobby's elite technical team. Bobby stood in the center of the room, his jaw set, his gaze fixed on a satellite map of the city. He looked up as I entered, now dressed in a borrowed silk blouse that felt like a second skin. The safety deposit box was empty, Ginny, he said, his voice flat with suppressed rage. She moved it, probably right after we left the restaurant. My hackers are hitting a brick wall, trying to find where she's routing her data. I walked toward the main screen, my mind flashing back to the service corridors and cramped offices of the Gilded Oak. To them, the restaurant was just a location. To me, it was a living machine I had navigated for years. I saw the network diagrams they were struggling with, a mess of firewalls and encrypted nodes. You're looking for a digital trail? I said, pointing to the corner of the map where the restaurant sat. But Lissa is smarter than that. She wouldn't use the public Wi-Fi or even a standard cellular tower near the building. She used the internal staff network. The lead hacker, a man with hollowed eyes, scoffed. We checked the staff logs. They're clean. Because you're looking at the front-of-house logs. I countered, my confidence growing as I stepped into my role. In the basement, behind the dry storage, there's a legacy server we use for the old inventory scanners. It's hardwired, archaic, and completely independent of the main system. The staff calls it the Ghost because the management forgot it exists. If I wanted to upload massive amounts of evidence without being flagged by a modern firewall, that's where I'd go. Bobby's eyes sharpened. Can you get us into it? I don't need to be there, I said, leaning over the keyboard. The password hasn't been changed since the 90s. It's the founder's mother's name. I typed in the string of characters, and suddenly, the monitors flickered. A new data stream erupted across the screens, hundreds of encrypted files being funneled to a remote server. The room went silent as the hackers began to intercept the packets. They weren't just files. They were audio recordings, ledger scans, and photographs. The Ghost was screaming Lissa's secrets. We have her, the hacker whispered, his fingers flying across the keys. She's routing everything to a secure facility in the Heights. She's there now, finalizing the transfer. Bobby looked at me, a dark, predatory smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. He didn't say thank you. He didn't have to. The way he placed his hand on the small of my back told me everything. I had provided the eyes he lacked, and now, the king was ready to take back his throne. He turned to Marco, who was already checking his weapon. Prepare the cars. We're going to give my wife the celebration she deserves. The air in the surveillance van was thick with the hum of electronics and the smell of stale coffee, a stark contrast to the opulence of the private dining room projected on the screens before me. We were parked in the shadows of a secluded estate in the Heights, a place where the city noise couldn't reach. I sat between two of Bobby's tactical team, my eyes fixed on the center monitor. On the screen, Bobby and Lissa sat across from each other once again, a dark echo of our night at the restaurant. Lissa looked impeccable. She wore a deep emerald dress that made her appear every bit the loyal wife, her movements fluid as she poured wine into 2 crystal glasses. She thought this was the victory lap, the final moment before she handed over the ghost, files, and watched Bobby's world go up in flames. She didn't know that the server she had spent weeks filling was now a hollow shell, and that the man sitting across from her was no longer her prey. "You've been distracted lately, Lissa," Bobby said, his voice coming through the speakers with a chilling, distorted clarity. He leaned back, his white shirt unbuttoned at the collar, the light catching the sharp edges of his jaw. "I thought perhaps you were worried about the business. Or perhaps about us." Lissa reached for his hand, her smile a masterpiece of deception. "I only ever want us to be safe, Bobby. You know that." "I do know that," Bobby murmured. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, crumpled piece of paper, the very note I had slipped into the bill folder. He smoothed it out on the table between them, sliding it into the candlelight. "Which is why I found this so interesting. A waitress gave it to me. A girl who saw a wolf where I only saw a wife." I held my breath, my hands gripping the edge of the console. On the screen, Lissa's mask didn't slip, it vanished. Her eyes darted to the note, then back to Bobby, the warmth in her face draining away until she looked like a marble statue of a killer. The silence in the dining room was so heavy I could feel it through the monitor. "You should have killed her when you had the chance, Lissa," Bobby said, his voice dropping to a whisper that made the hair on my arms stand up. "Because that girl saw everything you thought was hidden. She's the one who opened your ghost server. She's the one who watched you sell me out." Lissa moved with a sudden, violent grace, reaching for the small clutch on the table, but Bobby was faster. He didn't draw a gun. He simply grabbed her wrist, his grip like a vice. In the van, the tactical team shifted, their hands on the door handles, waiting for the signal. I watched as Lissa realized the trap hadn't just been sprung. It had been built around her from the moment I picked up that burner phone. Bobby leaned in, his face inches from hers. "Dinner is over, Lissa. And so is the lie." The transition from the dining room to the courtyard was a choreographed nightmare of efficiency. On the monitors, I watched the heavy oak doors burst inward as Bobby's men swarmed the room, but my focus remained on Lissa. The woman who had carried herself with the poise of a queen now looked like a cornered animal, her emerald dress snagged on the arm of the chair as Marco's team pinned her associates to the floor. Outside the van, the muffled cracks of suppressed gunfire signaled that the perimeter hitmen, the ones she thought were her insurance policy, were being neutralized before they could even draw their breaths. Bobby didn't look away from her. He stood in the center of the wreckage of their dinner, his white shirt stark against the dimming light of the room. He wasn't shouting. He didn't need to. The silence he commanded was more terrifying than any threat. He watched as they dragged Lissa's lead contact into the room, a man who looked like he'd been pulled through a war zone. The digital evidence I had unearthed had mapped out every node of their conspiracy, leaving them with nowhere to run and no lies left to tell. "It was never about the money, was it?" Bobby asked, his voice a low, chilling vibration. "It was the thrill of the takedown. You wanted to see if you could break the man no one else could touch." Lissa spat at his feet, her elegance finally replaced by a raw, jagged hatred. "I almost did. If it wasn't for that girl." Bobby tilted his head, a dark, protective shadow crossing his features. "That girl has a name, and she has more loyalty in her smallest finger than you had in your entire marriage." He signaled to Marco, "Take them to the holding facility. I'll deal with the final details tonight." The van door slid open, and the cool night air rushed in, smelling of pine and ozone. Bobby was walking toward us, his stride slow and deliberate. As he reached the vehicle, his men stepped aside with a newfound reverence, not just for him, but for the girl sitting at the console. He climbed into the van, the space suddenly feeling smaller, charged with his overwhelming presence. He looked at the monitors, then at me. His hand reached out, his fingers brushing against the silk of my sleeve before resting firmly on my shoulder. It was the touch of a man who had burned his old world down and was starting a new one. I looked around the van at his elite soldiers, his hardened inner circle, and realized they were all looking at me. They weren't looking at a waitress anymore. They were looking at the only person Bobby Ronald trusted with his life. "It's over, Ginny," he whispered, his gaze intense enough to burn. "The lies are dead, but we're just getting started." The penthouse balcony overlooked the city, a sprawling sea of lights that felt like a collection of fallen stars. The wind was cold, but the weight of Bobby's coat around my shoulders kept the chill at bay. He stood beside me, his silhouette a sharp contrast against the midnight sky. The chaos of the heights, the sirens, and the screams of a crumbling empire felt a lifetime away. "I need to understand one thing, Ginny," Bobby said, his voice dropping into that low, gravelly register that always made my breath catch. He didn't look at me. His eyes were fixed on the horizon where the dark water of the bay met the sky. "That first night at the restaurant, you had every reason to stay out of it. You were a ghost. You could have let the clock run out, and you would have been safe. Why did you risk everything for a man the world calls a monster?" I leaned against the cold stone railing, the silk of my new life whispering against my skin. I thought about the girl who had spent years making herself small, the waitress who carried plates and pretended not to notice the darkness in the corners of the room. "Because I was tired of pretending," I said, my voice finally finding its edge. "I've spent my whole life being invisible, Bobby. I watched people like Lissa and the men who haunt my neighborhood treat the world like their playground, while people like me just tried not to get stepped on. Someone had to see what you couldn't. I realized I'd rather be in danger and actually matter than be safe and mean nothing." Bobby turned to me then, the harsh lines of his face softening into something that looked dangerously like approval. He reached out, his thumb grazing the line of my jaw, a touch that was no longer an interrogation but a promise. "Now that you've seen what this world really looks like, the blood, the betrayals, the cost of the crown, what happens now?" he asked. "The restaurant is gone. Your apartment isn't safe. But I can have you halfway across the world by morning. A new name. A quiet life. Is that what you want?" I looked out at the city. I thought about the quiet life, the one where I'd go back to being a ghost, fading into the background of someone else's story. Then I looked at the man beside me, the lion who had cleared a space for me at his side. "I'm done carrying plates, Bobby," I said, meeting his gaze with a steady, unyielding fire. "I want to stay. I want to be the one who sees the things everyone else misses. I want to be your eyes." Bobby's smile was slow, dark, and genuine. He didn't offer me a contract or a vow. He simply stepped closer, drawing me into the shadow he cast over the world. "Good," he whispered, "because I don't trust easily. But I trust you." The city glowed below us, a vast, beautiful, and lethal kingdom. I wasn't a waitress anymore. I wasn't a victim. I was the secret weapon of the man who ruled the night, and for the first time in my life, I was exactly where I belonged.